Good evening. Hopefully everyone out there can hear me. Give me a thumbs up if you can. Okay, good. Hi, I'm Tricia Dellis, and I'm the acting superintendent of Carmel Unified School District. And I'm really excited to be here tonight with all of you in this first of all time town hall meeting in this district. So you might find us a little glitchy, but we'll do the best we can as we go through our technology. We would much prefer to have you in person to see your smiling faces and interact and have a good time together. But unfortunately, we're doing what we need to do on these Zoom meetings. So you know a little bit about me. My husband and I just moved to the community last July. And so we haven't even been here a year yet, but we were drawn to the community by the obvious, beauty around us, but also because we heard so much about the small town feeling and the relationships that people have, really a closeness amongst everyone around here. And so we were drawn to that. That's what we're from. We're from Nevada City, which is a small town in the foothills and in California. So a very similar type of district where you know your neighbor and you know all the people at the grocery store, and you are very polite at the stop sign because you know you're going to see each other again. So we're here, and about myself and my background, I've been here or been in education for 32 years. And my husband is also an educator. He's a teacher and an athletic director for his whole career. So we are lifelong educators and very passionate about children and students and what's best for them. That's been our whole focus of our life's work. So very important to us, what is best for students. I have two children. One is my daughter. She's 28 years old, and she just graduated from Brown University with her master's. And my son, Brandon, graduated from Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz, with his literature degree. So they're often doing their things in the world. And so that's part of our journey here in Carmel, is we're empty nesters, and we wanted to sort of get out of our bubble and see something new. And unfortunately, we didn't realize when we moved, we would move in a pandemic. And so instead of seeing something new, we're seeing a lot of the inside of our house. So that's been a frustration, but I'm sure we'll be able to venture out a little bit more as time goes on. So tonight, I want to start us off with an apology. I want to say I'm sorry, as the superintendent, that the survey that we put out for parents last week seemed to have set off a firestorm. That was not our intent. We actually had a couple parents look at our survey before we sent it out, hoping that we would find those areas of frustrations or concerns, and we could correct them before it went out, but we didn't catch this one. And this one really set people off, and for that I apologize. We did not put the full-time option on the survey because that is just like, that's what we want to do. And that was something that we didn't feel needed to be called out because, of course, that is the most best option for our students and for all of us. We want them back in school. They need to be back in school. So we didn't put it on the survey because what we were trying to get was, if we had to do hybrid, what would those options be? So for that, I apologize, because I think there's been a lot of undue angst in the community, sort of trying to interpret how we're seeing things for the fall. And I would add to that, it's an ever-changing sort of situation. And I agree that our communication could be better. And I am committed to make that the commitment to the communication in the future. I'm making that commitment to you. So we understand the frustration you're feeling, and we share a lot of it as well. Obviously, in this world that we're living in right now, we're really concerned about our children, and we're concerned about each other. We're concerned about our health, and there's a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety out there right now that's adding, I think, to our conversation. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to be changing this anytime soon, right? It seems like the professionals are telling us that it's going to be until the vaccine comes out, and there's all kinds of predictions about that. But it's not going to be this fall, and It's, you know, we're sort of taking things in semester blocks in our minds right now. So what's really important at this point in time is that we are collaborating together as a community, like I know we can, and that we're rethinking what's possible, right? And that we can come out of the other end of this situation better than we started it. And that's what we're all looking for. So with that, I would like us all to set our mindset that we are looking for best intentions, right? We want to assume good intentions of each other. We all want what's best. We also want to take this opportunity before we go into this conversation to recenter us on what's important, which is the health and education of our students and each other. So with that, we're going to go through a brief. I'm going to try to power through these slides. The slides are important because they give you some idea of, you know, sort of the information that we're drawing from as we have our conversations. And they also give you an opportunity to, so when you ask your questions, to have what we're thinking. So with that, I would say, let's go to our slideshow. Next slide. Okay, so the purpose of our meeting, and I'm going to take a moment here because I'm not able to see my whole screen. So can you help me out? We've got this disclaimer on the middle of my slide. Thank you. And collapse that too. Okay. So the purpose of the meeting is to provide factual information for reopening school as we see it, to share our district's process for deciding about the school opening, and to seek input and answer questions from all of you regarding the school opening. Next slide. Our process to date is that we have done some surveys. We surveyed internet and technology needs. We put out a parent survey regarding distance learning in May, and then our most recent survey in June about the reopening. We've done a staff survey that we just put out as well. And we had planning meetings with a pandemic task force, which had a lot of different people throughout the district when we were sort of in the height of things in March. Our admin council is talking about this daily, and principals are very active on their particular sites as they talk to their staffs and trying to get that information and share concerns and feelings on the site level as well. We've been training staff. We are having this town hall meeting tonight, and we've been actively purchasing, like everyone right now, PPE and our cleaning supplies. Next slide. Our guiding principles, as we sort of put this together and got our mindset around what we wanted to do, is number one, we're prioritizing our health and safety. And we'll have links at the end of this presentation that you can see the guidance that we're looking at. We want to provide the best possible instructional programs for our students. We want to address the social emotional needs of students, staff, and families. We're considering the impact on families. And we're also want to maximize our district resources. We also need to recognize that we have a lot of diversity in our district, and we have all kinds of different outlying areas because we're a 400-acre, expansive district, and we have a lot of different kinds of learners that we have to consider. We are engaging our stakeholders, and obviously that's part of tonight's conversation, engaging you. And we are going to consider that feedback as we go forward. And really for us too, we have to be mindful that we need to be flexible and responsive because the circumstances are changing all the time. Next slide. Before we sort of get further, I wanted to sort of talk about the misconceptions that might be out in there. I know a lot of things are coming back to us, and people are concerned about some pieces and parts that might not necessarily be what our understanding is. So one of those is that teachers do not want to come back to work. And that is not what we're hearing. And you'll see in our survey results as we go down a little further here, that they want to come back. And in fact, the expectation is that all staff will be coming back full time. We are allowed to come back full time with no restrictions, has sort of been talked about. And I would say that we are looking at the guidance from the state, and we need to follow that. People are talking about the fact that there are many other schools and they're all bringing back their students full time. And yes, there are schools that are doing that at this point in time. The ones that we're sort of looking at too seem to be smaller settings, and they're able to do follow all of the guidance from the state. Distance learning will be the same as it was in the spring. That's not the case. We've done a lot of training with our teachers, and what happened in the spring was during a crisis, and we are now, regaining that situation, and our intent is to come back fully better in that realm, should we need it, if we're in shelter in place again, which is quite likely from what we're hearing. People are saying that a decision's already been made. You're already saying you're not coming back full time, or you're doing this, you're doing that. No decision has been made. We are open-minded at this point in time, and we're simply trying to take in all the information and consider all the opportunities that we have. The decision now that we're making now won't be changed before the start of school. That's another piece too. Daily, we are getting new guidance, and this week, some of you already contacted me about the AB 77, and that gives us a whole other layer that we're considering at this point. Next slide. This section is about our surveys. Next slide. So this is the responses were from our parent distance survey that we put out in May. These were the key points that came out of that. We heard you. We need to have structured schedules. We need to have our information in a easier way, or a platform for people to find. People talk to us about Zoom, more teacher contacts and communication, and the challenges of managing the learning at home with childcare and the instruction. And then also appreciation for teachers and staff did come through that survey as well. Next slide. The parent reopening school survey. You just filled this one out, and we had a lot of responses, and we thank you for that. It showed us that of the models polled, alternating days and alternating pairs had the most support, and distance learning had the least support. Top importance from the parents were health, safety, consistency, in-person learning, regular fixed schedules, and academic rigor. 51% selected critical, and 35% selected helpful to have siblings attend on the same day if we're on a hybrid model. 28% said that transportation would be somewhat or a significant issue if we were not able to pick up in town, but only in outlying areas. 7% of respondents said that they were definitely not returning in the fall, and 5% said they most likely would not return. And by the way, we're going to have these survey results on our website, and probably by tomorrow, so you can go in and look deeper at the results as well. Next slide. This is just a graph showing the distance and hybrid preferences. And again, this will be on the website posted, so you can look at it a little bit more closely. Next slide. Staff responded that 96% expect to return in the fall. This is all staff, so teachers and classified. Their greatest concerns are health and safety, following the health regulations, cleanliness, social distancing, and the PPE availability. 68% of them are comfortable to very comfortable teaching in a hybrid and distance learning model at this point in time. And 82% want more professional learning about distance learning. So again, we had a tremendous turnout for our professional development a couple weeks ago, but you can see this is an area that isn't typical for teachers, and so they want more training around it. Next slide. So our next section here, next slide, is around planning and the things that we consider as we go through our process. And I'm not going to read this whole slide because there's a lot there, but it's the health and safety slide. And it talks about following the guidelines from the state and, being prepared, having all of our PPE lined up and temperature checking and 6 feet and all of that good stuff. So that's all there for you to look at later if you need to. Next slide. We wanted to sort of give you a graphic here, and the top picture is a bit intimidating, I have to say. But these came from the state guidance documents. And so it's showing the fact that as students come onto the campus, there will be an adult greeting them and taking their temperature daily. And we do have these type of thermometers ordered. And so that's sort of what that's going to look like. Next slide. This is a graphic showing you sort of what the state is telling us how it might look if you're walking on campus or standing in line. There's going to have to be different signage or ground painting and that sort of thing to keep us compliant in our 6 feet distancing rule. Next slide. This is what an outdoor situation might look like if you're outside and you can put people 6 feet around, and obviously they're showing the teacher there in the middle giving instruction. Next slide. And everyone talks about the hula hoop, right? So you're trying to figure out sort of how big that distance or how you can sort of visualize that in your mind. And it's a hula hoop for children, so they can visualize how far they need to keep people away. Next slide. The models that we've been talking about ad nauseum. So we're, every day going through these different models. We talked about an all distance model. Some of you heard about that. It was talked about for the high school because it gave us the best opportunity to provide all classes. If you go into these hybrids or different models, or unless we're open and everyone's on campus, of course, it's difficult to have all your courses offered. We had a hybrid that talked about alternating days, a hybrid that talked about alternating pairs of days, hybrid alternating weeks, and a hybrid doing an AM, PM model. So half in the morning, half in the afternoon. And then obviously, as I said, the high school considering a primary distance learning with regular check-ins and support. And then of course, all day on campus. Next slide. Facility concerns, of course, of the 6 foot distance and just how many students we can fit in a classroom. And so principals and Dan Paul have been going around to each classroom and actually counting and making sure that we can fit. And it looks like for our district, we can fit between 9 to 16, depending on which classroom we're measuring. And we're also considering, obviously, the gym. We're probably going to have to fill up gyms, fill up theaters, multi-purpose rooms, and all those areas. Outdoor spaces, of course, we've got a beautiful, beautiful district. And so we're going to use those as much as possible. It's just going to have to be obviously weather permitting on that. I'm going to have Dan Paul talk later a little bit about the tent option. Some people were talking about getting tents, and apparently DSA, the state, they're putting guidelines around that. So that's making that a little bit frustrating. And if we do lease additional sites, if they're not compliant with what a public school needs to have, then it can take up to 2 years to get approval for those different facilities that we might consider locally. Next slide. So like I indicated before, it's a changing landscape. There are several districts or many districts who are putting out plans as we speak. Daily new plans are coming out around the state, but there's also new laws and things to consider as we go along as well. And some of those districts are probably going to have to go back and reshape what they decided, because now we just have this new Assembly Bill, AB 77, that will most likely, I would imagine, be signed on Saturday by the governor. And it is very, very intent on getting as many students as possible back into schools. So those of you who are wanting your kid back in 5 days a week, this legislation completely supports that. It's obvious that statewide, the experience of having everyone in shelter in place and having students at home is not the best, and we don't want to continue that. So this legislation will back the fact that we all need to get as many kids back into school as possible. So that's a win, right? The county guidelines have been interesting. I did talk to Dr. Moreno a couple of hours ago, and he told me that he is not in charge of the guidelines anymore, that we are to refer to state guidelines at this point in time. There was a point in time in which the county was sort of on the front end of that, and his office has backed away from doing that, and they are referring everyone to the state guidelines. So I think some of you parents found that out before I did. So thank you for sharing that information too. Next slide. Other considerations that we as Carmel Unified have to consider are the fact that we are currently for the 2021 school year anticipating a $1.2 million deficit, and we are dipping into our reserves as we go forward. Our master schedules at our secondary level will need to be modified, certainly, and student choice could be limited depending on where we land. Bus capacity is another one of those topics that's huge throughout our state. The distancing requirements take our capacity down from, approximately 56 students to 14 per bus. So that is why we're considering just busing from the outlying areas in our district. And limited access to childcare programs is a possibility as well as people go forward. So that's something we're considering. Next slide. This is a graphic of the bus and sort of what their guidance shows us. Limited to every other row. Next slide. So with that, I want to give us as much time as we can with the question and answer period, because I think that's the most important tonight. Our next steps is we're looking to do a possible special board meeting on July 15th so that we can talk about the plan we land on after we take all this good input in. And then of course, our official board approval will be on July 22nd, but we're hoping to get it out by July 15th so that we know we're running, time is running and the school year is getting close. We are going to be communicating that plan to our stakeholders. We're going to continue teaching our teachers and making sure that they're prepared for whatever situation that they're faced with this unpredictable year. And we also are going to be figuring out our transportation and food services. And we all know that it's all subject to change based on what's going on with the COVID virus and sort of where we are. So there we go. Before I hand it off, I want to do some introductions of people who are on this call tonight. This is your the Carmel Unified Leadership Team. So Yvonne Perez, our CBO, Paul Bien, who is our tech specialist, Blaise DiGirolamo, who is our curriculum and instruction person, Steve Gonzalez, who is our special ed director, Laura Dunn, who's the director of Carmelo, Elisa Tacconi, who is the principal of Cooper, Jay Martin, principal of River, Brian Peterson, principal of Tular, Dan Morgan, principal of Carmel Middle, John Lyons, principal of Carmel High School, Tom Perry, principal of Carmel Valley High School, Dan Paul, our extraordinary director of operations and transportation and everything. Bill Schreier, who is the president of ACT. And we are so fortunate tonight also, oh wait, I see some assistant principals on there. I didn't know you were going to be there. So let me get them too. Jen Casper, who's the assistant principal at Carmel Middle, and Debbie Puente, who's the assistant principal at Carmel High School, and Craig, I don't know if Craig's there, but I'm going to say his name. There he is. Craig Duana, the assistant principal at Carmel High. These are the people who are grinding around the table with us, trying to figure out a plan. And we also have two incredible moderators this evening who are going to keep us on track. And we have board clerk Sarah Hines and our board member Todd Weaver, who many of you know because they're both parents in our district. And so you're probably running into each other along the way as your kids grow up together in their schools. And so they're going to keep us on point this evening. They are going through your questions as they come through live. And they are going to sort of look at themes and try to make sure that they get the most pressing concerns out to us so that we can answer you. Of course, there are hundreds of questions, and so not everyone's question will be read out tonight, but we're hoping that we get the themes that you're concerned with and we're able to get you some answers. Okay, so I'm going to hand it off to Sarah and Todd.
Thank you, Tricia. And thank you for everybody for being here this evening. I'd like to start with the first question that there seems to be a theme around, and it is, can one of you please address masks, wearing masks in the classroom, as this is a deciding factor for many families as they think about the return to campus?
All right, everyone's going to be shy, so I'm going to jump in on this one. I am on a weekly superintendent call with the county soups here in Monterey County. And this has been like every single meeting that I'm on, we talk about masks for about a half an hour. We are supposed to be getting clearer guidance on masks by tomorrow. You've heard, we had the local Dr. Moreno saying that it has to be 13 and older wearing masks. And then the governor just came out saying everyone, over 2 years old had to wear a mask. And as far as the classroom situation, we've had a lot of conversation. What the superintendents are pushing for is masks as people are moving through the campus, right? So as you're coming onto campus, you're going places, you're going to the restroom, moving around. But if you're actually in your classroom setting with your cohort, taking those masks off because you're 6 feet apart. That makes the most sense. And that's what the superintendents are all pushing for. And we don't have, definite clarity, but as soon as we do, I will push that out to the families to let you know what that is. A lot of controversy about masks. The pediatricians are in negotiations with epidemiologists at the state level. There's a battle going on, and it's a righteous one, I think, because obviously having young children with those masks on all day, lots of concerns about that. So I'll have more information about that as it comes through.
Thanks, Tricia. The next question. What will happen when a positive case occurs on site?
Anyone want to take it, or do you want me to go? I'll go. Okay. Dr. Marino has been very clear that if we get a positive case on campus, that they will be involved. So we, as a school district or as a school site, are not the ones who will be making these decisions. The county health department will be saying what needs to happen. They are in charge of the tracing and tracking of the exposure points. And so, there's everything, it could be that one student goes out on quarantine. It could be a classroom goes out on quarantine. It could be a wing goes out on quarantine. It could be a school. It's just going to depend on the tracing and what they find. So there is not a one size fits all on that one. They want us to obviously be in direct communication with them as cases come about.
Thank you, Tricia. The next question is a two-part question. So the first part is, why is the high school being handled somewhat differently in terms of the planning process? And the second part of that question is, what is the thinking around fall sports at the middle school and high school level?
Tricia, you want me to handle that? Good evening, everybody. Let me take the easier of the two questions, which is where we are with sports right now at the high school level. On July 20th, the CIF, which is the governing body for athletics, will meet to make a determination on fall sports for the state of California. So as far as competition is concerned, we have no ruling on that. There have been a lot of discussions at the state level in regards to fall sports, whether it's going to be a readjustment of the seasons. So some fall sports may get moved to winter or spring, or adjust. Will certain sports be able to play in the fall while others won't? And again, that's based on state guidance. So we are in the Pacific Coast Athletic League, which is made up of 32 schools over 4 counties, awaiting that guidance. Our next Pacific Coast Athletic meeting is on July 22nd, where we will then take the guidance from the state and act accordingly. Because we span over 4 counties, some counties have had different opening rules regarding students congregating for small informal workouts, things of that nature. Monterey County, up until recently, had not had that capability. So at the last Pacific Coast Athletic Board meeting last week, the entire league drafted a letter requesting that Monterey County be able to begin that process, and we're awaiting response as to can we begin the process of doing informal workouts with our athletes. So we hope to have some movement on that in the next couple of weeks, one way or the other. But we're hopeful that in the coming weeks, we're going to have a lot of information regarding athletics. To the larger question about why we're looking at the high school maybe slightly differently than the middle and the elementary schools, the unique challenge presented for high school is we are trying to ensure that students can maintain all of the coursework necessary, not just to graduate from high school, but to be prepared for going on to college and receive their A through G acceptances. In order to do that, we want to try to continue to offer as wide a range of course offerings as we're capable to. And if we look at some of the more kind of restrictive models, that means pulling away certain programs that not only are A through G level coursework, but are in many ways the tie of what brings students to the community at Carmel High School. So we've been looking at ways to try to maintain fidelity of the instructional program so that all students can get the coursework that they've asked for and maintain that high level of standard as we prepare them for college. So the models we've been looking at in terms of what other high schools are doing and what we've been examining is how can we maintain that high quality of instruction and maintain the full breadth of our program so that students don't fall off the graduation pace or fall off the college level pace. That's all I got on that.
Great.
John.
Thank you so much, John.
All right, next question I think is going to be for Dan Paul, so I'm calling you out now to prepare. That is, what facility changes are expected?
So we're working on a number of things at the facilities. We're installing sneeze guards where the secretaries greet the staff. There's going to be some additional fencing installed to control the points of entry. There'll be striping and marking on sidewalks to indicate spacing. A lot of the things we're doing are around air filtration. All the filters in the furnaces will be changed. Their hours of operation will be changed, so that will be flushing the air in the classrooms. There's actually a whole list of things we're doing that will, I think, be posted in a video tomorrow.
Dan, thank you for that. I have a follow-up question for you on that. If the district moves to an AM/PM schedule, will there be time left between the AM and the PM for cleaning and sanitizing?
We actually discussed that this morning, and based on the elementary schedule, we could do it at the elementary schedule. It really depends on what it looks like for the secondaries. But if we have to do that, we will figure out a way to make it happen.
Great, thank you. The next question that I would like to ask, I think also, I don't know who it falls under, but there have been a lot of comments around, will there be a liability waiver that is signed by parents when our students return to campus?
No, we're not anticipating having people sign any waivers. I know that's being talked about around the state, but what our desire is to follow the state guidelines so that we don't have to do any sort of waiver processes, using all of our facilities and getting as many students on campus as possible, and not doing a waiver sort of process. Now that might change. See, I'm going to say that, and then, maybe my attorney's going to come back tomorrow and say, oh, we got, so bear with us.
Okay, excellent, thank you. The next question, which kind of comes in 2 parts. Why can private schools open with differences from state and county? And the related question, how are state guidelines relevant to us?
I'm going to ask Blaze to answer that one because everyone's heard me and Blaze is really good at this one.
Well, the second one, how are state guidelines relevant to us? Is that we are required to follow state guidelines as a public entity. So if the state puts out state ed code, we have to follow that ed code. So state law, state guidelines are the guidelines that school districts, public school districts have to follow. I'm not completely sure on all, I know I've talked to Dan Paul a little bit about the facilities at the private schools, but many private schools are smaller. And I believe they would be following state guidelines as well in order to open. So if they're choosing to move students into other buildings or limit their class sizes, I don't believe that they have any waiver to work outside the state guidelines for physical distancing. So if they are opening, many are smaller and have one class per grade level, and they can be a little more flexible in how they spread that out with, you know, if you have one class at a grade level, you can have several different people you can push kids out to while you have people in the classroom with the teacher. When you have multiple classes at grade levels across schools, it becomes a more difficult proposition. So I don't know. I know there's some things with the structural requirements at private schools. Private schools have to follow just regular building code, where public schools have to follow
Here, I'll say
some different building codes.
Teacher training and
Um,
technology.
You are
You do.
not muted. There you go. And Dan might be able to speak to that. That could make a difference in how they can operate.
Thank you so much, Blaze. The next question that I have is a two-part question regarding technology and training. So the first part is, what technology will be used to improve distance learning? And can we be more specific about what training has been held to transition to online teaching? If need be, has an online teaching platform been chosen?
Do you want me to take that one, Blaze?
You can take the technology piece. I can take the training piece.
Go ahead and start that then.
So the specific training that we've been working on has looked at multiple things. One would be an online learning platform, which would be Google Classroom. And within the training, we worked on synchronous learning. So the teachers learned about Google Classroom, how to use that more effectively, along with Aries and Moodle. And then synchronous learning using Zoom, and then asynchronous learning, creating videos using Screencastify, and other online resources, and looking at different tools for formative assessments, including Edpuzzle, quizzes, and then other at the elementary level platforms like RADS Kids, ST Math for the lower grades, and ILM Math for the upper grades in elementary. And teachers were taught about effective pedagogy, and really and they got in some really deep conversations and groupings on the second day to really go deeper in how they can actually restructure their classes. So there's still more work to be done. We're going to be offering more PD for our teachers around distance learning and blended learning. We're excited with the work that's going on right now with Colin Matheson and my group of instructional coaches and others in the district who have a really strong skill set, other teachers, a cadre of teachers who helped basically train teachers. We had 120 staff members come to training on the 8th of June and many on the 9th as well. And that's a good chunk of staff members to get some initial training. And we were going to offer that same training again later in July, and then looking at days for planning, because not only do you need to train in technology, you need to plan for how you actually modify your instructional model when you are teaching in a distance format. So, looking at your essential learnings and standards, bringing things down, it's kind of a less is more type of things. What are the types of screenings and diagnostics we're going to need to use, and the formative assessments and progress monitoring we'll need to use, and then the systems of supports for students. So we're going to continue working along all of those lines to try to meet the needs of everyone and get our teachers really ready. And Paul, you can speak to the actual tech tools if you'd like.
Yeah, and Sarah, can you repeat that part of the question?
The question was, what technology will be used to improve remote learning?
Yeah, so we have subscribed to the various tools that Blaze has talked about. You know, one of the things that didn't go well, I think, during the spring was having a variety of tools being used, and parents made that clear in the surveys. Like different teachers had different tools and parents were having to figure out, you know, all the various options. And so having the single platform is key. We're upgrading some of the teachers' technology, the actual computers that they have. Some of them had quite a struggle working from home with a computer that may not have had a good web camera and those sorts of things. We've ordered new Chromebooks for all the incoming fifth graders and ninth graders. Any of the older computers from the outgoing 8th graders and 12th graders, we will repurpose for kindergarten through 2nd graders who need them. And if needed, we will order other machines if we are in a hybrid model to make sure that the younger students also have a computer to take home.
I just wanted to jump back in as well. One thing that Colin and the team will be working on when they get back a little bit later in July is developing parent and student support guides, online supports for the common tools and platforms. So we'll have a much more clear set of guides for everyone to follow, and fewer platforms that you'll have to navigate. It'll really be a much more simplistic and easy to follow process.
Thank you both. I have another follow-up question to that, and thank you again for being so thorough. If the distance learning portion is going to be necessary, will teachers be required to either record or hold live instruction?
I can take a whack at that from the high school if you'd like. From the high school perspective, we would strongly encourage staff to engage in live instruction because we felt that one of the feedbacks we got from students, teachers, and parents in our internal work was the need to have greater face-to-face connection. So one of the things that we have been talking about the high school staff is how can we increase the live instruction if we live in a virtual environment, and going to a more rigid bell schedule where classes kind of mirror what a traditional schedule would look like, so that teachers would have the opportunity to jump in and do a 30-minute live presentation and have those check-ins over at the high school level. So we've been doing a lot of work in the department work at getting that squared away and getting that set up so that there is a much more direct contact on a daily basis in multiple classes by multiple instructors.
Yeah, and I will jump in as one to say that across the lower levels as well, we would see live. If we were in a primarily distance learning environment, meaning we were sheltered in place again, we would enact a schedule with live instruction. If we're in a blended model or a hybrid model, we will, for like at the elementary, for instance, if you're with your teacher one day in the classroom, the day that you're home, if you're on an alternating schedule, you would have your other teacher specialists meeting with you live on those days. So you would have live instruction, even in a blended model at the elementary level on the days you are not in class.
And just one more point, we're also very aware that in terms of learning theory, having students just sit and watch, if they're at home and there's a lecture going on in their classroom, there's limits to how much of that a student can absorb. So we're talking about finding that balance between the live experience, but for the kids at home, having something that may be asynchronous. It may be a lesson that the teacher has prepared in advance, or it may be a different resource, not the teacher themselves, just to make sure that the kids have a mix and they're not spending 6 hours a day just staring at a screen. That's not good for anybody.
Can I say something about this? So I was introduced as Bill Schreier, president of ACT, but I'm also a high school social studies teacher. And one of the things I experienced as a teacher was kind of just an open-ended, okay, move to instruction. And one of the common refrains that I heard from my colleagues was some frustration about not knowing what the expectations were going to be. And part of that has to do with the fact that our MOU was very bare bones. We had to get something done and we had to get it done quickly. The goal is to have much more defined expectations so that teachers know what it is they're expected to do. It's pretty hard to move from a model that you're very familiar with and all of a sudden move to something that you have no familiarity with. You're not expert in terms of the pedagogical requirements. And so teachers did the best that we could. And hopefully now with that experience and with the additional training, we're going to be able to provide more guidance to teachers as to what the expectations are. And I think that will alleviate a lot of frustration also for parents and students, because there will start to be some continuity and some consistency in instruction.
Thank you so much, Bill, and all of you who answered that question. I have one more follow-up distance learning question, which is, will returning be mandatory, or will families be able to choose an all distance learning model regardless of which track, A, B, or week on, week off, whatever we go back to? Will there be an option to choose distance learning only?
Blaze, I'm going to put you on this one. You've read everything in the last 24 hours that I haven't read at a close read. So I'm going to let you answer that.
Okay. So we have conflicting information that we're looking at. Some districts are planning to make an offer of pure distance learning for some folks who don't want to come back or have a reason not to come back. And that's a way that a lot of them are creating the space to allow other kids to come daily, because they were moving kids off the campus to be in a fully distance model. And that allows you to then have that extra space and be able to spread the kids out. But with the new AB 77, when I looked at the language, there was some language regarding what will allow distance learning. And the initial piece talks about a student with health concerns. And then I talked with some folks at the county, in the county Office of Education, to ask how we would interpret that. Is there just a choice, or is it really specifically a health concern? They felt like it was going to be a health driven. I then saw the California Collaborative on Educational Excellence put out something today that there possibly would be choice, the way that AB 77 could be interpreted, that there would be parent choice. So right now we have conflicting information. When you read the letter of the bill right now, it could go either way. But based on what we just heard today from that group in Sacramento, I imagine there'll be some level of choice available, if that's really how the legislature is gonna have that thing interpreted. So there's still conflicting information. I couldn't give you a perfect answer on that.
Thank you, Blaze.
All right, next question. This is, how will we address equality in education across all students, including individual education programs or IEPs?
I would be looking for Steve. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and anyone else can jump in. Blaze, you can jump in. So under the Individual Disabilities Education Act, there have been no exemptions or waivers, with the exception of timelines. So with that end, we recognize that each student will have an individualized plan, and whatever model we land on, we will be working closely with parents and the school teams to determine and prioritize the set of services that should be applied so that the student can have access to the curriculum, and also to ensure that they continue the progress towards their goals on the IEPs. I know that there might be a question about assessments as well, and any pending assessments. For those families who have children who do have pending assessments, the timelines do pick up once school does resume. So we would be re-engaging in the assessments once we do come back.
Thank you so much, Steve. Okay, I have a two-part question, probably more geared to the elementary principals. Part one, will after-school programs be available along with T-Rex and or River Rec? That is part one. Part two, are the elementary school age children going to be expected to sit in their rooms all day, or will there be opportunities to play? Is social distancing going to apply to small groups of 12? And if so, how are you going to get young children not to touch each other? Are teachers supposed to not touch the children? And if so, how will they emotionally support them without touching them? How will the idea of social distancing look regarding touch, play, and interaction?
I'll take a stab at a few of those. This is Jay Martin, principal of Rivers School. The first question that I heard was about after-school programming, and I know that our district is working hard and having consistent conversation around providing after-school and before-school childcare. So that is those conversations are evolving. I know that it is ideally our intention to accomplish that goal and provide that support. Regarding after school programming, for example, at Rivers School, our after school enrichment program that is supported and sponsored by the PTA definitely is a program that we need to take a look at and may not be able to offer at this point in time, given the current landscape with the pandemic, because we can't very mindfully be attending to securing these cohorts where students are intermingling as little as possible. And then after school, so to speak, let the horses out of the barn and have various students at various grade levels intermingling in these after school classes. And that's the way they are structured for parents to sign their children up for whatever course it is that they're interested in. I do know that there's models for after school programs as well that allow for online participation in enrichment that I've been having some discussions with my staff about, but for the time being, I cannot see us operating an after school model. And I'll let Ryan Peterson, as we go through these questions for elementary, perhaps jump in and answer that for Tularcitos.
Yeah, much the same for Tular, I think. And Laura, I don't know if you want to jump in as well, since you run the after school programs, but I know that we're having to look at how we can run the after school programs to maintain cohorts and reduce the cross contamination or the mixture of students and maintain all of that. Before we get on to the question about what the school day looks like for little kids and interacting, Laura, did you want to say anything about the after school care?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. I'm pretty confident that once the, Ryan and Jay put together their groups of children in the classrooms and whatnot, and we will work very closely together on that. I can put together groups of 12 children in the after school programs, prioritizing siblings and grade levels stay together. And luckily we have a very good ratio of caretakers to students already. It's just a matter of maybe 2 of the groups would be outside and 3 of the groups would be, we would have to spread out the groups. But I think that we will be able to still follow guidelines while providing care in the best way possible, because the groups will have to kind of be regrouped after school, but I could keep them in that same group, if that makes any sense.
And then
I think the only thing,
oh, go ahead, Ryan.
I was gonna say, the only thing I might add to that is part of it's going to come down to the numbers. I know, speaking for Tularcitos, we have a waiting list every year before and after school care, and we may even have less room moving forward with the guidelines we have to meet, which I know is going to be difficult on families. Jay, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to address the second question, which was focusing on the socio-emotional wellness of our students and teacher-student contact and what play is going to look like in real time when we are at our schools. And those conversations too are ever evolving. I know that it was only this week that the California Department of Public Health put out that new mandate regarding wearing masks, where we were caught off guard and learning that it didn't matter if a student were under, I believe it was 12 years old or 13, that they do now in fact have to wear masks. Earlier, Trish Dellis, superintendent, shared with us that there's going to be another decision regarding the wearing of masks on campus, because they're so problematic and challenging for little children to wear. We certainly can all think of a variety of issues that can arise when you have a 5 and 6 and 7-year-old wearing a mask. Nonetheless, if that's what we're tasked with legally enforcing, we'll have to do so. But we're going to have to very deeply consider the socio-emotional impact on real young children, older children too. But I know that it's going to be a challenge, and Ryan Peterson and I, in the larger elementary schools anyway, are constantly inventing schedules and different strategies to minimize congestion and to secure these cohorts, but at the same time address as best we can the kids' socio-emotional needs. So we haven't had conversations yet as a staff about will, for example, teachers and students, the degree to which they would physically interact, but we are well aware, and the state has been consistent with communicating to us as educators that we have to promote and ensure this 6-foot distance. So that's been the part that we're really grappling with in terms of our schedules and all aspects of our operation.
I
Can
think
I
that-
weigh in this as well?
Sure, go ahead, Bill. Then I'd
So
love to.
I have had a lot of conversations with elementary teachers about this very topic, and they're really concerned about that. I mean, they know how important it is to have contact with students. They're worried about what does a mask look like on a teacher's face in terms of a student feeling comfortable and all those things. And I would say it's one of the most difficult problems, maybe face shields or something where you don't have that. But harmonizing those two interests is front and center for teachers. Should
This
know
is-
that.
I think this is the topic that hurts the heart the most, right? Telling little kids, telling any kid, right? All of us have been around. We've been at the beach where you see the high schoolers high five and give each other a bit. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a kindergartner, 12th grader, or adult, right? You see your friend, you want to give them a hug, and I think this is where it's a delicate situation, because we don't want to be in the business of stopping kids from hugging friends, right? We want to create schedules during the day. We want to create routines during the day that through those schedules and routines, it encourages that distance to take place. But at the same time, not telling two friends that show up at the door and give each other a hug to stop it. It's got to be, we have to look at it and change the approach to that, to teach our kids and not to put a positive spin on it, I think, but to say, we need to do everything we can to keep each other healthy. We need to do everything we can to keep each other safe. And this is the way that we can do that with each other. We can do that by making sure that we're, not getting too close to one another in the classroom, or that we make sure to wash our hands on a regular basis, or that we're wearing our mask if we have to wear our mask when we're sitting at a table together, or when we go outside and play. That we've got to make sure that we cannot allow ourselves to get to a point where I don't, reprimand might be too strong, but where we're reprimanding kids for getting too close to one another. I always like to remember everybody needs 10 hugs a day, right? Like, we crave that physical affection, some more than others, but I think we've got to make sure that when we're dealing with our kids, that we're teaching them we're doing this for a reason. We're maintaining distance to help each other, to be loving to one another, to care for one another, and encourage that as much as possible. Teachers to put routines in that encourage that as much as possible. But also, I think, to be realistic, that kids are going to go up and hug, and that should put a smile on our face. Right? Kids playing together should put a smile on their face, but let's make sure that if we need to, they have masks on while they're playing in close proximity so that we can encourage the safety as much as possible. But that question, it wrenches my heart.
I want to jump in. That was like the most spectacular answer. And we can't make this punitive. You know, we're human beings and schools are about being human. That's what we're there. We're interacting and we're used to that closeness and that engagement. And so, you know, we're all, this is going to be a new territory, but it cannot be a punitive sort of situation. And parents need to know, you know, let's be real. People are going to be touching each other at some point in time.
You know, I wanted just to add, Ryan, thank you for that comment. That was excellent. I know that our teachers are really creative and our staff and you know, just all the folks around the table. There are so many things that people can think of that we haven't thought about, like, you know, virtual hugs and virtual high fives. You make games out of things for kids to create that connection. Well, we have to really think in those terms and really get kids to enjoy those interactions, even if they're less physical than they have been in the past. We have to find ways, you know, mark on their hands with a marker, and then the game is go wash off the marker off your hands at a certain point. And that's building a hygiene practice, but it's a fun game for the kid because they're going to meet the challenge the teacher's bringing them. So I think we have to look at ways to get creative in how we, you know, build in these health and safety practices that are fun for kids in the most we can. So.
Great. Thank you so much for the thorough answer to that question. We appreciate it.
Okay, next up, how will we address classroom size to teacher ratio? And are we addressing hiring additional staff to fill the increased demand?
I'm going to ask Dan Paul to talk about just the classroom spaces in general. I know we touched upon it, and then I could talk about the teacher piece.
So we've measured a number of the classrooms in the district to look at the distancing standard, and where we seem to run into some of the problems is at the high school where we have larger classrooms or larger class loads. So we're looking at using other spaces at the high school, such as the gymnasium, the library, possibly the weight room. Some of the large spaces that could be repurposed to hold our larger classes. When we look at some of the standard size classrooms at the high school, we're looking at about 15 students distance 6 feet apart in those rooms. When you get to some of the smaller rooms, it's even less. So we may be moving some teachers based on the loads in their classrooms and using some spaces that are normally used for a different purpose.
And I would say as far as staffing those spaces, I obviously shared that we're deficit spending, but we do have a reserve. And I know that the board is, you know, concerned about, you know, that making sure we have what we need to give the best program to our students. So we might be looking at hiring in certain areas. But right now, before we get to that point, what we're trying to do is analyze the district as a whole and look at all the credentialing that everyone has, because, you know, oftentimes teachers have more than one credential. They might be teaching, you know, music, but they might also have a multiple subject credential. And in that case, we would be pulling them to where the need is and moving people around a little bit to cover what we need. So that would be our first course of action, is using our staff and our teachers wisely and resourcefully. And then if we have those needs that come up, we're prepared, you know, we would go forward and do what's best for kids in that situation.
Okay, thank you. The next question. There's been a few questions around this subject, so we have summarized. In terms of CUSD's budget, why are we facing a deficit? Did income change or spend change? Can you please summarize the budget reserves? Can we spend more now and still stay solvent? And can you also address the increased teacher spend approved in the budget?
Yvonne, there you go.
Yes, just unmuted myself. So the teacher spend in the budget, Sarah, would you mind just repeating that question again, that whole question, so I can make sure I address all of that?
Sure, I'm sorry. I know that was a mouthful, even for me. Why are we facing a deficit? Did income change, or did our spending change? Can you please summarize the overall budget reserves? Are we able to spend more now and still stay solvent? And can you please address the increased teacher spend approved in the budget?
Okay, thank you. That was helpful. So why are we deficit spending? So we have created a budget, and of course, a budget is created a year in advance, and we do, and it's created based on the information that we have available at a certain point in time. We are not funded like an LCFF district, so we are funded quite differently. So we're not as affected as some districts across the state. But our revenue did come in lower than we expected from our property tax revenue, and so we had to adjust for that accordingly. We're still navigating that situation and trying to, we have explored that quite extensively with our auditor controller's office and also with the assessor's office. And so as we prepare our budget, as we move forward with preparing our budget, we do have conversations with the assessor's office. And so we had a downturn in our revenue that from what we were expecting. And so as we move forward into the new budget year, we had to adjust for that. And so that did affect it. The other thing that is perhaps causing the deficit is that we also do not budget for grants and things that we don't have an award letter on. So typically when we have some programs that are grant funded and we're waiting for some of those programs that we fully believe will come through, but we don't budget for it at the point in time that we're preparing the budget for the new fiscal year until we know for sure that we have those funds available. So there's been a couple of things that are causing that deficit. And then one of the questions was, can I summarize the budget? So sure, what we're seeing is that we have additional expenses over our revenues, and so that's causing about a $1.2 million deficit in our budget. One of the things, and that's unusual for Carmel, that's an unusual situation. We do have really good reserves. The board has done an excellent job over the years in making sure that we have reserves to get us through these kind of times. And we expect that we may have some additional difficulties going forward just because of the state of the economy across the whole nation and in the state of California. So one of the things that the board has really done an excellent job on is setting aside sufficient reserves to get us through times like this. Because one thing that finance people talk about is that one thing you will be sure of is that recession is right around the corner. And it's been about an 8-year recovery, a slow recovery, but we were in a recovery and things were looking really good from an economic standpoint in the state, and then COVID hit. And so we were, like I said, somewhat affected by that. The overall budget, so we do set aside reserves. We have a very healthy reserves, 23% or about $15 million. And I'll put that into perspective. That's about 3 months of reserves. $15 million sounds like a lot, but it's only 3 months of operational expenses. But it is a good reserve. It's within the standards of what you would expect to see from the Governmental Finance Association recommends, that you have a 3-month reserve. And so we're there. In terms of what we had for teacher spend, that changed slightly. As we're preparing a budget, we talked to our principals and we talked to our director of special ed, for example, and there were some real things that were coming out, some real information that came out during the year as we were talking about what do we need for the next year as we budget for that. And it became quite apparent that we needed to provide some additional services for special ed. So the only addition there were a few little additions. They were all student-centered, completely student-centered. The additions were, we added some special ed expenditures to address those needs of our growing special ed population. We are not growing in population from the number of students that we have, but the number of students that we have has increased in the special ed service area. And so we needed to add some additional supports for that. One of the things we talked about with the board as they approved the budget was that we needed to have a year to plan because COVID hit so quickly. And we came off of really great information in terms of what finances were looking like for the whole state, for the economy. And in March, it all started falling apart. And so because we have good reserves, we talked about, let's take this year to plan, see what happens with COVID. We'll have a better idea of where we will be financially, and we have sufficient reserves to get us through those times so that we can make good financial decisions.
Can I weigh in on this? And I'll be honest, I feel like I'm taking a little bit of a risk. First of all, the raise is across the board. It is not a teacher raise. It is a raise for administrators. It is a raise for classified employees, and it's all the same. And these raises were negotiated 2 years ago. We have a 2-year contract. They were approved at the time by the board, but because of budgeting requirements, they have to be approved again. So some people coming along lately might see that and say, whoa, teachers are just getting a raise right now. So that's one thing I want to sort out. But the other thing, and this is where I feel like I'm taking a bit of a risk, is when that question is asked, there's the possibility that it can be interpreted as criticism of teachers, because I don't remember ever hearing that question asked previously. And now I see it being asked all the time. And it's not hard to imagine that people would see that also in light of some of the other comments that have been made over the past, as in some way denigrating teachers who have worked really, really hard. Yes, there were things that could have been done better, but I just really encourage people, if you want to talk about the finances across the board, fine. But to just single out teachers really doesn't help things. And it certainly doesn't feel good to a lot of us. Thank you.
Yes, and I'll just follow up on Bill's comments there, making sure that people understand that that we did have a 2-year agreement with all of our employee groups, and so what the budget reflects is that agreement that was agreed to almost 2 years ago. And at the time, and you don't have time to adjust for that when it happens in March, where the state of the economy falls apart. It's a process that takes time, and we do have reserves, as I mentioned, to get us through those times.
And a follow-up related, are we planning to increase spend to address COVID-19 and what we're looking at doing on site?
Mm-hmm. Right. I believe that the board and the administration is committed to identify all of the areas that we may need to spend more to support students and to support teachers in the learning process. That is still being figured out. We also know that the state, we have an application to put in. We're eligible for almost just under 100, and I think it's about 186,000. That is federal funds that will flow through the state, and we will be putting in our application, and those are funds that are being provided directly to help pay for some of those increases that schools may incur due to the COVID-19 virus. And there's there was some small pots of money even this year, about $74,000 that came in that we were able to put towards helping with distance learning for students as well.
Thank you.
Oh, I have one here for Dan Paul. And I think this also might be for Eliza. How will we handle bus routes and planning for our large area? And what about the remote learning in some of our remote regions?
So I can handle the busing. Our initial plan is, once we've developed the plans for the sites, we're gonna assess the rider loads for the outer areas. And when we say outer areas, it's Big Sur and Kashawa. And once we know we're able to handle those loads, then we'll start working our way in closer to the school sites. But our first priority is going to be the areas that are farthest from the school sites.
Thank you, Dan.
And if I could handle the question about the, how did it go, Todd, the connectivity? So.
Yeah, the last question was about addressing the distant students who have poor connectivity because of the location that they are.
Yeah, so the board has already committed to increasing the number of hotspots that are available. We've had the most success with the AT&T hotspots, so we are increasing that amount, and we'll provide those to folks in outlying areas. We also expect to bring students in who have no really good option, where the hotspot won't work. We are expecting to set aside, if we're in a hybrid model, learning spaces just to accommodate giving them access. So those are kids that conceivably, if it's sort of an A-B schedule and they're not on schedule, they come to the school just to be able to access the internet. We definitely have to make sure that they can access the materials.
Great, thank you. Back to a scheduling question. If there is grouping with an A-B model, how will the groups be determined and how will it relate to those families that have siblings?
At elementary school, I can share with our parents the priorities that we think that would need to be addressed when we're talking about splitting a schedule. And this might seem obvious, it's definitely a top priority, which is that for those families that have siblings, we definitely want to ensure, and this was evident in the parent survey that we conducted as well, that the siblings at the elementary school would be on the same schedule. So families definitely we would want to ensure are on the same schedule, so that would be our top priority. And then we would also look at learning needs as well in talking with teachers and our support staff too, because strategically we might have to group those students in at a particular time and a particular day to optimize our service and our resources. So that's part of the conversation as well. And I think that we would work with parents who have exceptional circumstance where maybe because of their home situation, they have to be in a particular group. Of course, parents can realize how difficult it would be when we're separating hundreds and hundreds of kids, but we want to be open to those discussions too about if parents are grappling with some really difficult circumstances.
I think too, we know that we'd also want to work with middle school. We share more students with middle school than we do high school, but also working with middle school, depending on the schedule that they're on, to make it as easy as possible on parents. And I know all of you know at all the elementary sites every year when we do the class placements and trying to balance kids out and figure out how to make the best grouping possible, how much effort that takes just to split them into groups of 20 to 24. It's splitting them into, if we need to, groups of 10 to 12 at each grade level to meet students' needs and families' needs, and make sure that they work in the cohorts together for families is it's going to be a task. It's going to be a lot of work to make that possible and try to meet everybody's needs and give everybody an equitable education.
just want to add from the high school perspective as it relates to scheduling, and I'm going to try not to get too inside baseball in how we build a master schedule, but the division points we're trying to look at is obviously class size, capability. Can we put student, if we had to go to an A/B hybrid model where half the school is there and half the school's at home, we're going to look at trying to make the cut points as natural as possible. One of the challenges we face at the high school level when it comes to scheduling is high school schedules are very specific, and the older a student gets, the more specific their course requests get. And so the cut points may be different at different grade levels based on what students are taking. And because very few high school classes are grade level specific, you can have 10th graders and 11th graders in integrated 3. You can have 9th graders and 10th graders, 11th graders, and 12th graders in choir. So our challenge right now is to see if we can do a division that is equitable without having massive changes to students' requests, and then try to determine if there's a standardized cut point for us to be able to say, this is the cohort A, this is the cohort B. What that may yield, unfortunately, is from a parent perspective, if the choices become, we'd like to keep our students all together in one cohort district-wide, that may eliminate certain options at the high school level for those students to take a particular course, because it may only be offered that one period and only for a certain number of classes. So the challenge that we face on our level is this, again, the specificity of our schedule and the fact that we only offer, in some cases, two classes of philosophy. So if that's just not a cohort it's a full at that point, they wouldn't be able to take it. So it's definitely a struggle that we're having at the high school level with the A/B model in matching up. And again, and I really want to stress this point from, again, purely a high school perspective, is the balance between the need for the academic load to be at the level that our parents and our students have expected to find success. I don't want to have a student be limited in their college options because we were unable to successfully get them the course that they needed in some capacity. So it's gonna yield some tough choices on our end when it comes to scheduling that is complex in our world.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Another 2-part question here. Are you talking to medical professionals? And what happens when students arrive with symptoms?
I would say, as far as medical professionals, we haven't had anyone come in, because what I'm seeing and finding is that the medical professionals are not on the same page. So it can get quite confusing for us lay people who are not the medical professionals to sort of take in that information. We're already trying to, make sure that we're following, sort of what we're seeing in our world of education. So what we're doing is basically following the county in that vein, I would say. My understanding is every time I read an article or see something from doctors, pediatricians, epidemiologists, the scientists, everyone, there's just a lot out there. This is new. This is a new virus. And so that is ever changing. And we, for us right now to bring in a lot of different doctors gets very, I think, complicated. I'm thankful that we have so many professionals in our district, right? We have doctors whose kids are in our district, and some of them have been reaching out and giving their opinions as well. So that's appreciated for sure. It's just that it doesn't seem like everyone's on the same page at this point in time. So it can make it complicated for us. Was our second half? I don't know.
I would also say this, if we were given advice from local doctors or what have you, if it went against the state requirements right now, we couldn't follow that advice from the doctor and disregard the state requirements. We'll be held accountable to those requirements and would face liability if we did not. So even if, experts say kids don't transmit the virus, which a lot of people say there's less evidence of that, that is in and of itself would not relinquish the fact that we have to follow California Department of Public Health guidelines. And in terms of jumping into how you get into school, I think some of the principals have looked at some really structured approaches for actually entrance and exit or entrance of school. So I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that, about how that would look. It would be much more structured. It's not a free for all, drop off your kids and they show up at school. There's going to be
Sure.
structure
So
to that.
at elementary school, for example, if we have, I've identified about 5 ingress points where we would actually even have families scheduled to drop their children off at, and before students actually enter campus is where their temperatures would be taken. If a student had a fever, for example, then we would do our best to isolate that student. We've even had to sort of substitute for the time being our very small nurse's office for actually a much larger room so that we can maintain physical distancing and then some for any student that would be presenting with a fever. So again, the students would have their temperatures taken on the exterior of campus at these different ingress points. And again, we'll utilize what space we have. It's a large space until we can determine our next step in communication with parents and health department if needed.
Okay.
I would jump on what before, sorry, Sarah. I would just say one thing. I know this has been a part of the conversation out there as well. The guidelines, we understand the guidelines are guidelines. We understand they're not mandates and all of that. We know they're not, we know that it's our choice to follow them, but our legal counsel has said you have to follow the guidelines or you are going to lead yourself down the wrong path and be liable in a way you don't want to be. So I totally hear you. I understand. It's a guideline and I know we kind of get hung up on it, but we're just trying to follow the lead.
Next question. In one of the earlier slides, Tricia Dellis mentioned that something like 96% of staff want to come back or expect to come back in the fall. Would Ms. Dellis please confirm whether that means 90% expect to come back on campus or just come back as employees? And thus that 90% figure includes those who want to come back as remote employees who are distance learning teachers.
Great question. We put that staff survey out to see what people were thinking at that point in time. This was all staff, so district office staff, clerical staff on the campuses, bus drivers, librarians, everyone throughout the system responded to the survey, and we had a very low rate of people saying they were not coming back. Our message is that everyone is coming back. They're all coming back to the buildings. They're all coming back to work unless they have some sort of issue that needs to be dealt with through HR. And they will be going through that process. There are leaves that are, available to certain people under certain circumstances. And so they'll have to go through a process in which they take that appropriate leave depending on their situation. And they have rights to those leaves by law, ed codes, contracts, and all of those things. So if there are teachers who are going to be not able to come back on campus because of a health issue or something that keeps them out, but they still want to work and they want to be part of the situation, which that is the desire of everyone I'm talking to. I'm not hearing anybody trying to sort of, get out of this. Then we would be looking at possibly using them in these other situations with students who can't come back, right? So we're hoping to sort of pair those things up, and districts throughout the state are doing this. That's how we sort of have to think of this problem. There are not a lot of teachers out there, and certainly we have found that our sub pool is not very deep. And so we're going to be having to use the teachers and the staff that we have. And my experience in the last few months is that staff has reached out, and I have to commend the classified staff as well. They're saying, we want to help and we will work out of what our normal capacity is. We will, I might be a security person on the campus, but I'm willing to come in and make phone calls and connect with students. And so we sort of have to think of these situations differently. And I've had nothing but positive coming back in from staff in that realm. They want to be engaged, and some of them are scared, rightly so, right? We're all sort of anxious and nervous about what this looks like and what it's going to bring. And that's okay. That is okay for people to feel that concern. We can't judge that it is what it is. People are watching the news, and the anxiety levels are off the charts for all kinds of different issues. So we're going to have to just take it one step at a time, treat each other with respect, have some grace around these issues as people try to, sort through their emotions around what's going on in their world. It's changing very quickly right now.
Okay, I want to weigh in on this too. We teach because we love being with students, not being at home looking at a screen. And that hasn't changed. I mean, I don't know where this idea came along that because a pandemic came through, all of a sudden teachers don't want to be with their students. We can't wait for the day we're with our students again. And we want it to be safe. So please understand that. I don't know where this misconception came from. I appreciate the early slide, but I don't know a teacher who doesn't want to be with their students as soon as possible and for as long a period as possible. That's what we do. And if you know this district, you know that's true.
Thank you. All right, we're going to be wrapping up any additional questions. It's 7:30. What we're going to do is get through the balance of the questions that we have grouped. We expect that to be about 10 or so questions. The next question is somewhat answered earlier. I'm going to tack on one other part that I think was asked after, which is how to allow friends to interact, and will there be recess and play?
At the elementary level, absolutely, there will be recess. I know with devising different master schedules for different scenarios, which is what we as principals have been doing daily, that we recognize the importance of recess, and that Ryan Peterson spoke to eloquently before. We're trying to bring as much normalcy as we can in very challenging times to these students' lives, and we are not willing to sacrifice recess as a great example. We want our kids outside. We want them interacting. And as Ryan also stated, we certainly are not going to admonish students for breaking, if you will, physical distancing, which is actually not necessarily the model that all countries are using. I from my own research, know that they do admonish students in some other nations when they do breach physical distancing. We do not want that for our children. And I think a related topic as well to recess is where we can continue to offer enrichment to our students, we will. There's a lot of talk about canceling field trips. There's a lot of talk about canceling assemblies, and there are some field trips that we'll have to cancel, and there are some larger scale assemblies that we will have to redesign, but we are going to do our best to maintain as much of these activities that make kids want to leap out of bed and join us for on a daily basis. That's how I've always prided my own administration and been so proud of my teachers as well, in that they recognize first and foremost that kids have got to love coming to school. And this is very challenging to do during this pandemic, and it is our number one priority despite all of these limitations that are being placed upon us.
I want to say something as well. There seems to be a bent for elementary teachers to this idea. The first thing I tell my students when they walk in my classroom in the fall is you're going to learn more in the quad than you're going to learn in the classroom. And at the end of the year, they understand what I mean by that. And that's a critically important part of high school, you know, and Mr. Lyons knows that. He just texted me and said, we have to talk about that. Tricia Dellis said that to me too when we were talking about this thing. So it's front and center at the high school as well. It's not just an elementary thing at recess. How do we incorporate that super important social emotional piece that the students do pretty much on their own? How do we allow that to happen?
I think I want to just, again, to add in, one of the things that we heard loud and clear from our students, and obviously particularly our senior class, is how much that this last senior class lost in this process, and the jeopardy to our current senior class of going through a similar experience of not having these kind of high school touchstones. So we want to make sure we find ways to recreate these events in some fashion. And I've already met once with the Associated Student Body Government group to talk about some of these things. So they're already knee deep in planning activities that do bring, how do we find ways to bring kids together safely to do the social aspects? Because, you know, not to be blunt, but, you know, high school kids like coming to school for the teachers, and that's great, but they really come to school to see each other. And that was the area that I think kids missed the most in that conversation. The other thing that we've been talking about at the high school is finding a way to build what we call advocacy cohorts that are centered around friendship groups that do allow kids that social time. So even if it's that they can't be a group of 700, they can be a group of 8 with their friends. And again, I go back to the how do we find ways to give them that drama experience, that choir experience? Those are as important as the bonding that comes far greater than anything, that, you know, Bill and I are ever going to talk about in the classroom in a lot of ways. That's what hooks them back into school and causes them to stay with it. And I think we also have to come up with ways, and we're working really hard, the counseling department and our social workers and all that, about how do we also bring in some of the more social emotional needs for our high school students who experienced over the last 3 months a sense of withdrawal and a sense of closure that put a lot of high performing kids all of a sudden in real danger of not being successful, because the model that they were used to, not only did we upend the teacher experience, we upended the student experience. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, kids, develop a whole new way of learning on the fly. So I think we're getting better at this. And I think if the baseline is where we were, and we know we can do some things with structure and accountability and things like that, and then add in a layer of regular check-ins with kids over the course of, if we're in this model where we're all sitting on our computer for a certain amount of time, how do we build in those social aspects and the social experiences, but also just give kids that understanding that there are people out there that you can talk to if you're struggling, or people you can talk to if you just need a moment. And I think that's where we're really putting a lot of our energy in the counseling world, with our academic counselors, with our social workers, with our relationship with Monterey County Behavioral Health, these other agencies that can come in and offer those for the high school students particularly.
Okay, thank you. A fairly short one. Is there any childcare for staff being considered?
I guess I'll take that
me.
one. Okay, yes, Laura, why don't you take that?
Of course. So childcare is a wide range, right? Anywhere from birth to 12 years old usually. And so our, given the guidance of the state and the county and many management bulletins from the Department of Education regarding childcare, the infant program, as well as all preschool programs, will operate at the same capacity that they have operated. Again, because we have ratios that are below what the state is recommending, we can operate. We will have to find physical, areas that are beyond what we normally do, but you will be creative with outdoor spaces and whatnot. When we're talking about children from TK through 5th grade, that has not been decided. And like I said earlier, I'm confident that we can work up some solutions, and I'll do my best, but I can't answer that until we know what the model is.
Yeah,
So
and I'll jump in real quick, is that, we definitely have had discussions that will be something will be necessary for us to address we need our teachers back and we need our staff members back. So in order for them to serve the kids in our district, they need to be here. So we need to help them as much as we can so that they can be back to do the great work that they do.
absolutely. As well as, in addition to that, serve as many families. And I've been given direction from the Department of Education that to prioritize families who are essential workers, and then go down the list. So I have been given very clear guidance as to who should have priority in enrollment for childcare.
Okay, a follow-up. Are teachers considered essential?
Yes. Yes, they are.
Great, thank you. Tricia, can you please discuss the evolution of the parent committee with each?
I want to
site?
interrupt on that last question. I'm sorry. I don't think that's correct in terms of teachers beyond childcare. The governor's
You're right.
order does
I'm
not
only-
mention.
Well, I guess you could be right, Bill, because I'm thinking of childcare teachers, which is
They
who
are
I-
essential, absolutely.
right. That's who I'm
Yeah.
in charge of. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're right. I may have misspoken there.
No, but it's important. It's important because there's a lot of implications by saying that employees are essential, and the governor's executive order is clear. That's just the reality. Essential as a term of art, not essential. Are we essential just in the scheme of things? But if you look at the governor's executive order specifying who's essential and who is not essential, teachers above the childcare level are not considered essential.
So moving on to the next question, I'll repeat it again, Tricia. So can you please discuss the evolution of a parent committee interacting with each site as well as district liaisons?
Yes, great question. I know in this last month that I took the position of acting superintendent, it's been difficult for me to be able to pull together a well-represented group. And so I know it has been glitchy, and it's just it's the time of the year and sort of where I'm stepping into this position. But my intent is for us to look at a different way of doing our LCAP process that will be each site will have a group of people that is all the stakeholders, if you will. So, you would have a classified person, a parent, a student, a principal, and, different representation on these different groups that will come together with me so that we're all dialoguing about each site and as the district as well. It's a model that I've used in the past that I've felt was really successful, and it gave parents the opportunity to engage on what the priorities of how we spend our money and what the priorities are of the district directly. And so it's a very powerful way to have the dialogue when you have those different sort of viewpoints in the room, able to interact and dialogue about how we're moving forward as a district. So I don't necessarily, and I'm going to have to give it more thought, to be honest, but I don't know that I necessarily want to make it just all parents, in that I think it just gets sort of a one lens, if you will. I think if we have all those different stakeholders around the table, we have more of a rich conversation because we're all bringing something different to how we see things. And so that's what I'm used to. It's what I put together before in the past. I'm still grinding on this because I know it is a major concern, especially right now in this climate in which we're on these sort of video, this video situation. I know there's people out there right now who are frustrated that they're not able to engage in live time. And I would just say that our experience in the last couple months of engaging in live time with just everyone in general has made it's almost like it's hurt relationships more than it's helped us collaborate in a real productive fashion. So we're not trying to stop your voice at all, which is why we have two parents moderating the situation, and they're going through all of these questions. We have hundreds of questions between people logging on and getting into the town hall and listing all their questions and the live chats coming through. So we're hoping that we get the general themes covered. And I know that Sarah and Todd are in there doing that. So we're not trying to stop your voice. We love your voice. I can't wait to see you in person. And in fact, if we have to do a virtual cup of coffee, I just moved here and I haven't been to the beach enough. So if you want to meet down there and have a conversation, I'm willing to do that. But to do it in these, with 500 people on a call, it could be really detrimental to us working together productively if we have a sort of open-ended situation. So we try to give it structure for a reason.
Oh, thank you, Tricia. We have a few more questions, and it seems that we still have people hanging on the line here. So I'll throw it over to Todd.
Have other facilities been considered, such as Sunset Center, Carmel Valley Youth Center, or Carmel Youth Center?
I can take that one. I'll cover the tent question and the other facility question at the same time. Public schools facilities fall under division of the state architect DSA for building. And they actually sent out information about tents. They're considered a structure and would fall under an application to DSA and must meet structural, fire, and accessibility codes. So you can imagine the type of structure we'd have to build for a tent. We'd have to have a foundation, fire alarm, accessible path to travel, potentially even fire sprinklers, depending on where we put it. So it could be as much of a production as bringing in a portable classroom. Other facilities that are not school facilities are considered non-conforming sites. And there's a specific procedure to go through to use those as a school site. You have to have an assessment done by design engineers, such as architects and engineers, and submit a plan to the Division of State Architects to bring them into compliance. Some of you that may have been in the community a while will know that Sunset Center was a school site, but since that time it's been renovated under local building codes, so it's also considered non-conforming. So it is a lengthy process to do any of those things.
Great, thank you. What is the rough timeline?
Sarah, could I add something to that?
Yeah, totally. Go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly say that a facility not mentioned, for example, was Junipero Serra for River School. And I knew immediately when I too was wondering whether or not the facility could be used. I knew that there would be facility issues, and I consulted Dan Paul, who shared with us those very real barriers. But in addition to that, it doesn't help us in the sense that even if we are outside, we would have to significantly increase our staff size in River School's case, and probably in Tularcitos as well, perhaps by as much as 40% of our certificated teaching staff to be able to ensure that the physical distancing that is being required of us can actually occur. So it hasn't been a matter, despite the very real space issues for those of you who know our campus, it hasn't been as much finding the space as it has been that we do not have the teaching staff. It would nearly have to double in order for us to bring our students back full time. And I'll add the obvious, which is I've wanted nothing, as I know every manager on this Zoom, on this town hall meeting has expressed, and it's been reiterated several times, that all of us want to be back full time. And that I'll even add, it's been much more exhausting for all of us, both as parents, and I'm a father of 3 as well. It's been exhausting for all members of our school community. And it's somewhat ironic because being in this remote distance learning model, one might think because we don't have 20, 25 kids seated in front of us that it might be easier. It's been much, much more difficult to preside over. And I don't share that because I expect necessarily empathy. I share that just because I think it needs to be said again and again that all of us would love to be back in our buildings and with our kids. It's the reason we got into the business.
Thank you for that. Next question. What is the rough timeline for a documented plan? And what is the process to circulate that plan?
I believe we outlined that on one of the slides, but what we're doing is we're taking input right now from all of you. We went through all the surveys this week together as a group. And so we have all of your desires through the survey process. And we're getting a sense from what your needs are through this process as well. So these are different points, right, of getting input from everyone. We're hoping to solidify, and we're waiting for AB 75. That's supposed to be signed on Saturday, we're thinking. So next week, we're meeting Monday and Tuesday, and it would be fabulous if we could sort of settle on our plans. And then, we need to make them pretty for you and get them graphically done and all that good stuff. And so that's why we're sort of shooting for a possible board meeting on July 17th. And so that's so that we can get it out quicker than later. And it wouldn't necessarily be an approval night. It would be showing those to the board, getting their input and direction and all of that. The board, the way that this has been pushed back, the board hasn't even had their opportunity to sort of give us their guidance. So I want to be able to do that special meeting so that they can hear, and they've heard some of it tonight, but certainly have them see the plan that we've settled on, and then move forward for an approval process by July 22nd. But you as families will be able to see it hopefully on the 17th, excuse me. I'm getting tired. Slow it down here.
Tricia, I just want to jump in. I'm looking at the slides. You have July 15th on the slide as a possible special board meeting.
Thank you for checking me.
Okay.
I didn't sleep much last night, so I'm a little rummy at this point.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we only have a few more questions. And I think this one is probably directed towards Paul and also maybe Blaze. Are you planning on focusing on a tech platform rather than a mix?
Blaze, that's probably a little bit more you because you've been working with the teachers and calling on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at using Google Classroom as our consistent platform, and then have everything linking off of the Google Classroom. So, Colin Matheson, our educational technology coach and expert in the district, has been working really hard to try to take all the work that teachers have done and our staff have done in different models and different modes, as in Moodle and other platforms, and find ways to sync all that together into Google Classroom. So there's a simple place for everyone to operate, for students, for parents. And so we're looking at a unified platform under Google Classroom at this point.
Please, can I jump in on that too? Just from the elementary perspective, one thing we know is that when students are at home, you parents are the teachers. So we know that we've spent a lot of time looking at Google Classroom, trying to figure out how to organize the landing page so that it's really easy for parents to navigate at home, so that you're not having to bounce around to find different things. Just want to assure all you parents that we're very much thinking of you when we think about all the technology that has to be done at home and how do we make it as easy as possible for you to navigate and support you as you support the students.
Yeah, and we'll be creating guides and supports for parents and students to work in that system to even add another layer of making it easier for you.
I think the other, if I could add also from a high school perspective, we've had a lot of conversations internally already about how do we mimic consistency across departments so that students aren't having to race around to, every 20 minutes just finding the assignment. That was something we heard quite a bit from parents and students. And this kind of dovetails a little bit into, particularly as it relates to our students for special education, navigating these systems with a processing issue or a visual issue can be really difficult. So we're also spending some time. I had a really great conversation a couple days ago with our special ed department about how do we manipulate support for special ed in whatever environment we live in. We have to consider what their needs are. Short of going to a full-time, everybody's back in school, there's going to be an element of hybridization or online components. So how can we make this work for not just the high performing student, but the students who struggle with organization and struggle with kind of basic functionality because of a disability? So there's a lot of intricacies that go into play with just saying this is the common platform. The other thing I'd add to that is that we have a partnership with MPC for one of our dual enrollment courses, and they use Canvas. And I know a lot of people have put that forward as a model for a learning system. Canvas is extraordinarily intricate. And a lot of our students reported back to us when we looked at it, how hard it was to navigate that system. And it's somewhat proprietary to the college universe. It's kind of tailored to the college environment. So we've kind of been looking at, again, user functionality for our high school students and making it consistent so that information is pushed out at specific times so that it can all line up with a much more strict, much more accountable bell schedule that really puts, I think, a lot of kids and parents, I hope, at ease about how to find information. And the last thing I would say about Google Classroom that I really liked as a parent is you can get a code to log in and you have your own Google that shows you everything that the kids are seeing. You just can't submit work for them, but you can see stuff. And then the last component would be also increasing our footprint on getting our information into Aries Gradebook, keeping our gradebooks up to date so that parents are getting that feedback as well as a universality to your system. So you know where the assignments are in Google Classroom and you know where the grades are coming out of Aries Gradebook, and those do link up. There's a button you can click, it takes you right to Google Classroom. So again, trying to bring a lot of structure to even a hybridized where some kids are on campus, limited kids at home, they need things to do. How can we give them those tools to be successful?
Thank you for that, John. That's actually a great segue into our last but not least question, which is we understand that the staff has been doing training and involving their education and rigor around distance learning, but is there any training planned for students so they can be successful at distance learning and making the most of their experiences online?
So again, if I can jump in from the high school first, and then I'll get out of the way because I've talked a lot. One of the things that we've talked about, regardless of what model we're in, coming back is doing kind of an ed tech boot camp for our kids, partially as this is how you navigate the class system, but also organizing it by some grade level, because we've got a whole group of ninth graders who have never set foot at Carmel High School and aren't part of the culture. And I know, the conversations we've had, I know Dan and the middle school guys have a similar conversation with all the new sixth graders coming on board. So we have to onboard these kids to our system, not just from a technology standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint. So we've talked about doing that first week of school kind of ed tech boot camps where all the ninth graders would come in groups, small groups that we could manage, and then they would go, kind of go from there, and then replicate that over the course of the year as an opportunity to kind of both catch our breath, do a little of the social emotional aspect, but also retrain our students and build that in. And I'm super excited, again, only speaking at the high school, we're bringing on one of our new teachers we hired is coming on board to teach our ninth grade geography program. She has an ed tech background, so she's fired up about bringing some new things to those students who are in that world, and teaming with Mr. Schreier with the AP Human Geography to really use that as our ninth grade anchor on how to train these kids to be successful in that world. So that's what we're doing at the high school. I'll stop talking.
I think it'd probably be appropriate to maybe go through each of the sites and respond appropriately.
Sure, I'll jump in. Dan Morgan, principal of the middle school, and John stole most of my lines, but since I haven't said anything all night, now's an opportunity. So yeah, we've had the same conversation at the middle school level. We're talking about, acclimating a new group of students, 5th grade, moving to 6th, and trying to help them figure out our platform. So common platform, as Blaze had mentioned earlier, is critically important for success of students. And we've talked a lot about setting up at least the first week as kind of a boot camp, and then also having regular reminders for really the next few weeks, kind of mini lessons, helping kids continue to navigate the platform, understand universal turn-in procedures for assignments, best ways to communicate directly with teachers, and really go over everything that they need to do to be successful in either a hybrid or online environment. So our plans for that are pretty robust, and we think that it'll help a tremendous amount, not only with kids and families, but just our program in general. Kind of moving towards that universal program will help us in the long run, not only in any kind of environment that we might open, but if we can open fully at some point as well. So we've also had conversations about engaging families somehow, whether that's over Zoom, but doing some type of tutorials or family information nights so that parents can ask questions from our tech professionals and get help with the things that they need as well. So that pretty much covers it.
I think for us, like I said earlier, it's going to be not only getting the students on board, that'll be part of whatever we do to start the year, but also realizing our big boot camp is going to be for the parents, and getting them up to speed on how to manage the programs and where to find things. And it's high on the list. I know Blaze mentioned it earlier about putting together all those parent tutorials for how do you navigate all the different programs that we'll be using, so that there's a good resource for parents to support the kids at the elementary school as well.
Jay? You are muted, Jay.
Jay, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I would just say, like to reiterate what Ryan just shared. I think one of the frustrations that we learned in the spring, when we first went to the closure, was that our students actually had much familiarity with tech tools that they were utilizing in class. And then when they went home, that knowledge goes with them. But given that parents now were at the least partners in this endeavor, I don't think that we did a great job of empowering them to best understand the potential of some of these programs. Using, for example, one quick example would be a math program that is both adaptive and self-paced for our students. And we need to better educate our parents about the value of those programs, and also to assist their kids at home as needed. So again, just reiterating what Ryan said, is that we, and a shout out to my colleague Ryan as well, because he's been talking about this for quite some time, about having an elementary style tech boot camp as well.
And last but not least, at Captain Cooper, we'll be doing some sort of boot camp for the kids on Google Classroom. But of course, our situation is unique. And as is mentioned before, we are a small school. So a higher percentage of our students will be able to be in school. For those students that cannot be in school, we will use those hotspots that Paul mentioned and do our best to get internet to the homes where it's needed.
Thank you, Lisa. I was going to ask you that, so you jumped in, but thank you. So let's hear from Tom, and then we'll hear from Laura. Tom?
Hello, from Carmel Valley High School. We have meetings with parents to begin each year. So we are planning on making sure that they understand how to use and log on to Google Classroom, because that will be also the platform that we're working with. And we're small but mighty, just like Captain Cooper. So we'll be able to do some things because of our small, nimble size. Our first week will be practicing Zoom even more. Kids know how to use Zoom, but when given the chance, they would rather not, but we're still going to reinforce that. So we'll actually have Zoom meetings while we're still at school to make sure that they know that there's a certain login time because we did find that some kids flourished in this remote distance learning, and some weren't as thrilled with it. So we are going to set up exact, set times for each one of our students that will log in, so we don't lose them, and we have that face to face. So we'll practice that the first week. It's like a boot camp type of thing, like the other sites have said. But like I said, we're very small, we're nimble, we're able to do some of those things, and hopefully we'll be able to get all our parents in before school starts in very small meetings, and teach them what they need to do to help make their student even more successful.
Thanks, Tom.
I'll just talk quickly about TK. I know I already addressed the preschool, but TK will follow the guidelines for both River and Tular elementary schools. We are looking very closely at our parent survey results right now, because we have such a short school day and a lot of need for before and after school care and childcare for those students. We're looking at all of that and kind of trying to analyze the best course of action there. One of the things we have to think about is if there's a high need for childcare, it doesn't make sense to have a hybrid situation as much if they're just going to be in the next classroom mixed with other kids. So we're really trying to be realistic about that and look at all the data we have. Our parent surveys are really important to us, and just really trying to figure out if we can follow the other elementary school guidance as well.
Todd, can I jump in, or Sarah, can I jump in really quick too? Because I appreciate that, Laura. Also just letting parents know that Jay, Elisa, Laura, and I all had the conversations about the role of technology in the primary grades, and wanting to make sure that the ways that we're using it is one that really enhances education. And we don't want to put our kids in front of screens any more than we have to. And so in a hybrid model, or even in a remote model, if we ever end up having to be in that again, we've been in discussion about how do we reduce that tech time for students at home, and for the time that they need to be on it, to make sure it's extremely meaningful and valuable, but also try to keep them off of it as much as possible, while supporting all the families and making your job easy at home if in that situation. So just want to reassure parents out there in the elementary world that we're not relying on technology to do everything. We realize it has its place. It's got an important place, but it has its limitations, and it needs to be limited in how we use it.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So I also wanted to just summarize that we obviously asked an awful lot of questions. I got my hand. I know. So we asked a lot of the questions, but there were also a lot of compliments that just came in rather than questions. And so I wanted to emphasize that we got an awful lot of compliments on how to, that this forum was very helpful, that I don't think most people, including myself, understand the amount of time and effort.
Todd, you muted.
Todd, you muted a minute ago.
We're actually using Sarah's microphone, but so we gathered up all of the compliments, and I just wanted to summarize what those compliments were. And the last one I'll say is thank you for your hard work and diligence on behalf of our kids. So turning it back over to you, Tricia.
Thank you. Okay, let's wrap it up tonight. This won't be the last time we talk to you. We will be reaching out again and having more of these town halls if it's a format that works for people. I just want to say that I'm honored and blessed to be here as your acting superintendent. This is an incredible place. I have perspective from another area. So to come here and to see the incredible teaching and the dedication of the teachers here, the classified support staff is phenomenal as well. A shout out to the district office staff. They often get left out of They're over here in another building, and so people don't see the work that they do on behalf of the district in general. There are about 430 employees in this district, and they love you and they love your children. Remember that. Remember that as we all move forward together. Let's have some grace and love. Thank you for being with us tonight.